Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. It's Tori, and today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read in May. Now, if you haven't seen my last video, I'm sure my backdrop looks a little different today, and that is because I have completely redone my library bookshelves. Today we're just going to go with this super basic camera angle, and we're going to kind of play around with different setups and things as we go along, so I hope you guys will bear with me while we get used to it. I am excited to talk about the books that I read in May because it was a really good variety of stories, which was cool because I always enjoy looking back on a month and seeing how many different genres or subgenres that I got to and how different all of the books that I read were. And we are going to start with a series that I've actually been reading since February, but I wanted to wait until I was completely done with all of the books before I talked about them on the channel. Some of you may get a nostalgic throwback thrill with this series. My two daughters, who are 9 and 7, have been reading this with my husband over the past 6 to 8 months and absolutely loved it. And my 9-year-old daughter came up to me and said, "Mom, you have to read this series. It's so good." And so, of course, how could I say no? So over the last few months, I have been slowly working away at the 8 original books of the Del Toro Quest, which is a middle grade entryway fantasy series for young readers. And I was pleasantly surprised, you guys. It's not that I didn't think this was going to be good. Obviously, my daughter has amazing taste. However, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like going back to middle grade and how I, as an adult reader who reviews and is more critical than the average reader probably going into books, was going to be able to handle reading a middle grade series like this again. And so I made sure to spread it all out and made sure that I didn't rush through the series. And I just finished the last 2 or 3 books here in May. I would like to do a dedicated review for this series because I do think that a lot of people have a strong sense of nostalgia when it comes to the Del Toro Quest books, and I can completely understand why. This is a classic quest adventure story with a lot of action, a lot of creatures and scary beings, and the author Emily Rada really just went for it when it came to designing an immersive and fantastic world for this series for young readers. The main character, Leif, is trying to free his country from the grip of a dark and terrible Shadow Lord by taking the Belt of Del Toro, which is this magical artifact, and restoring all 7 of the gemstones that used to be housed within that belt to their proper place, which restores the magic of that item. By finding all of the gems that the Shadow Lord has scattered all over this land and returning the belt to the heir of Del Toro, Leif and his companions are going to be able to hopefully push back on the dark reign of terror that the Shadow Lord has held over the lands since he took power. In every single book, it is definitely a heavy focus on the quest fantasy aspect, where we're getting a lot of page count dedicated to Leif and his companions Barda and Jasmine and the myriad of side characters that accompany them through bits and pieces of the story as they're going on this quest to retrieve the gems. There's a lot of journey before destination in this series, which means that by the time we get to the climax of each individual story, it does feel a little bit rushed compared to the journey aspect that we go through, the traveling, the little bit of revealing of the world building and the lore and meeting different peoples that we go through in the major part of the story, which was something as a adult reader I struggled with a little bit because we had all of this build up to the big climactic conflict at the end of each book, and I often felt like we rushed right through it to get to the end and move on to the next book, which was a little tricky. However, I do agree that belaboring a lot of action and that kind of thing in a very early young reader fantasy isn't necessarily the best storytelling call, so I can completely understand that. One of the things that Emily Rada does in this series that is very cool is she kind of add some deeper theme undertone to some of these books. Like, just for example, each of the gems represents a different virtue, and each book kind of has hints of the virtue that each stone represents, and the opposite of what that virtue might be represented in the antagonist of the story, whoever that ends up being in each book. And I found that really interesting, and I think there's a lot there that you could dig into as an adult reader, and I found myself kind of asking questions and trying to see what motifs or metaphors that Emily Rada might be using through the story, because that is something that I look for even in middle grade. I don't think that a simpler storytelling style needs to dumb down. I do like to see deeper themes being explored in middle grade and YA novels, because I do think that that's important. And yeah, so I did finish the Del Toro Quest books. Finally, this was basically the equivalent of reading like over 1,000 pages of middle grade since February. So I have definitely reached my middle grade quota for a little bit, but I will say that I enjoyed the series, and I think it's a fantastic opening gateway series for young readers who are interested in fantasy. Next up, I read Empire of Silence, Sun Eater Book 1 by Christopher Ruocchio, and as many of you know, this has been a long time coming. Like, I have been wanting to pick up this series for almost 2 years now, and I finally got to book 1 here in May and did a read along on my Discord with my patrons, and we had a fantastic time discussing the book, and that was honestly the best part. I loved being able to have the discussion as we were going through the chapters. I did an entire dedicated video for this book, and if you want to know my full thoughts, please go watch that. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it suffered from a little bit of pacing issues, and there was definitely some character motives, and I don't know if that I want to use the word melodrama that crossed a little bit of a line for me throughout the story. But overall, what I loved about it was seeing the world and the larger conflict that Ruocchio was setting up for the series, and that's what really hooked me. The alien creatures and races that Ruocchio sets up in this book, and the general galactic conflict is really interesting, and I like the way he describes the historical impact of all of the things that have happened up to the point of this story, and how he drops bits and pieces of lore throughout the story without feeling super exposition-y, because Hadrian, our main character, is really interested in history and lore and learning about culture and societies. So it feels very natural whenever we're given information about the world around us in the story, because Hadrian is also interested in it, which I thought was a really cool way of removing some of that info dump feeling. Overall, the fact that Ruocchio was like, I can't remember how old he was. It was like 20 or 21 when he wrote this book, is kind of mind-boggling for how ambitious it is in scope and in writing style. So I am really excited to continue with this story, because if this is our starting point, I'm very interested to see how Ruocchio grew as a writer through the series, and I'm really looking forward to picking up Howling Dark in June. After that, I needed a little bit of a brain break, so I read the most recent development in the Spy Family series, which is volume 13. I'm still loving this series, you guys. The Forger family is so incredibly delightful, and the commentary on what makes a family and how to be parents and how to love the people around you and how to be friends, and like, there's a lot of very basic level life skills that are examined in this series, but also in a way that makes it relatable and sweet and interesting. The thing that I'm having a little bit of a hard time with now that we're getting further into the series, we're not quite halfway, I think, but we're getting close, is that there's almost more time spent on some of the like fake or projected relationships in this series than there are the actual family dynamics between Lloyd, Anya, and Yor, which isn't my favorite, to be honest. And if you're reading the series and you know what I'm talking about, Like some of the relationships that are imagined in the minds of certain characters are getting a little old. I really hope that Tatsuya Endo doesn't lean on those fake relationships or imaginary relationships as heavily going forward, because if it continues to drag through the entire series, I'm going to be kind of annoyed by that. But I still love the series. I'm really excited for volume 14 to come out, and I'm still having a good time, still willing to continue with the series. This month I also picked up 2 novellas, and the first one is The Fleeting Word by Andrew D. Meredith. I had read Gloves of Eons in April, and this novella takes place as a prequel to the Collation saga, but it's kind of meant to be read in between books 3 and 4 when I asked Andrew where to put it. And I really enjoyed this. This goes back in time and gives us a glimpse into some of the older characters of the series and their origins and how they kind of came into their positions within these religious orders and political hierarchy. And I really enjoyed it. There's a very, very faint romantic subplot in this one that I enjoyed, and overall this was just such a solid novella. When it comes to novellas in epic series, it's kind of hit or miss for me, honestly, because sometimes I feel like they don't really add anything, or they follow a character that I'm not particularly interested in, or whatever, or it's something that probably didn't need to be expanded into a full novella. This one I actually feel really does a lot of good work adding depth to the series that it's in. And I look forward to seeing Andrew delve further into these characters in this particular time period. And even prior to this novella, I think he has some plans to do books that happen even before this. So yeah, this one I really enjoyed. Highly recommend, again, the Collation Saga if you're looking for something that is definitely outside of mainstream fantasy and really digs into the topics of politics and the different facets of religion, and just there's a lot of conflict undertone. It's not an action adventure heavy type fantasy. It is a slow burn with some really interesting character arcs and a lot of nuanced discussion on religion and political conflict. So that was my next step through the Collation Saga, which means that I am almost caught up. I only have one more novel to go, Dread Knight, before I am caught up completely on what's available for the series. The other novella that I read this month was The Lesser Devil, which is Sun Eater book 1.5. This follows Crispin Marlowe, who is a character we met in Empire of Silence. He is the brother of the protagonist in Empire of Silence, which is not a spoiler. It's literally on the back of the novella before anybody freaks out. And I have so many conflicting opinions on this novella, you guys. This is one of those kind of midline experiences for me, and I think part of that is because of the way it was executed, especially in the early pages of the novella, because we were set up for what I thought was going to be a particular tone with a particular focus with this character, and it swerved away from that in a way that I wasn't expecting, which sometimes I like, but in this novella specifically, it kind of felt a little bit like a letdown. And the information and the story and the lore of the world that Rakio explores in this novella, I actually think is really interesting and has a lot of value. I just felt like the execution was off. It felt a little bit even more melodramatic in some areas than Empire of Silence. It followed what felt to me more like a predictable hero's journey with some of the tropey kind of elements of that. And again, it's not that you can't have those tropes and do them well and have them be enjoyable. With this one, I just really struggled with the immersion, and I felt like while I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, overall it left me feeling kind of meh, middle of the road. I'm definitely still excited to continue the series, and I was happy to see that Crispin was the protagonist of the novella. But in that, I also felt a little let down by the direction that the story took as a whole. So that is my official opinion on Lesser Devil. I thought it was fine. I enjoyed some aspects of it and appreciated, again, I like when an author delves into the nuances of faith, different people's faith. But I just felt like it was a little lackluster, if I'm being totally honest. All right, next up is a book that I have been trying to figure out how I'm going to talk about this entire half month since I read it, and that is Hunting Party by Elizabeth Moon. This is a classic science fiction, and I have not read a lot of sci-fi, so everything I'm going to say about this book, take with a grain of salt, because I'm coming into it as a pretty much complete newbie. I wouldn't even say that it is hard sci-fi per se. It's still very character driven, which is something that always makes me nervous about dipping into some of the older classic hard sci-fi, because I worry that it's going to leave the characters at the door, so to speak, in favor of concept and plot and cool gadgets. So this one did not do that, and from the very first page, I was weirdly engrossed despite myself. And I say that because the story itself isn't one that I was particularly like, wow, what a engaging story. But the characters were so vibrant and unique and interesting that it kept me reading all the way through the book. And even once I got to the end, I was like, yeah, I think I want to read book 2, which was a cool feeling. So basically we start with Captain Serrano, who is a woman who has lost her position within the military as a dreadnought pilot, and she's kind of in disgrace because something happened with her superior that was sort of underhanded and we don't know what. But in order to still have a job, she goes and is hired on as a captain for a luxury yacht spaceship. And that luxury yacht is owned by none other than Lady Cecilia, who is an older woman who just enjoys her spinsterhood and her heaps of money. And her old captain was kind of lazy and she wanted a change of pace, I think. I'm trying to remember exactly why she hired the new captain. But anyways, as you might imagine, a very rigid military captain versus a very laissez-faire luxury yacht owner is an interesting kind of clash of realities. And from the very beginning, I loved the slow friendship that builds between Captain Serrano and Lady Cecilia, because they're trying so hard to understand each other's worlds. And through all of this, it comes to light that some smuggling might have been going on underneath Lady Cecilia's nose on her ship, and Captain Serrano is on a mission to set everything to right and fix the ship that wasn't repaired the way it should have been, because again, the former captain was lazy. Anyways, there were so many things that took me off guard about this novel, and I'm apologize for rambling, but I legitimately am struggling to know how to talk about this in any sort of coherent fashion. We also have like horse riding and fox hunting in the middle of this world of sci-fi and spaceship parts because Lady Cecilia is a dedicated fox hunting celebrity. Like, she was a champion rider back in her heyday, and she is traveling to this vacation planet where she's going to be going on fox hunts. And Captain Serrano loses a bet with her, kind of, and basically has to learn how to ride a horse on Lady Cecilia's simulator and turns into a fox hunter as well. Like, there's so many things in this book that I was like, wait, what? What? Okay, sure, yeah, yep, okay, cool. About halfway through the book, there is a pretty major tone shift, and it gets very dark as some things start to be revealed. And you have to kind of like commit to the character building before you get to that part, but I did find the characters in this book to be incredibly interesting and fun. They're very unique characters and they felt very realistic. There is a side plot of coming of age within this story because Lady Cecilia has a nephew named Robert, I think, who is like, oh my gosh, what a brat. And you might imagine that he also has some head-butting moments with Captain Serrano, but there's a lot of character building that allows the story to turn dark in a way that it really calls for your investment in what's going to happen to these characters. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed this book, you guys. I don't know if any of my commentary on this book is making any sense because I truly have not read anything like this before. And I'm still trying to gather my thoughts and figure out what it is about this book that I was so gripped by and why. So if any of you have read Elizabeth Moon's writing or this book in particular, please let me know down in the comments because you might be able to describe what I'm trying to say better than I am. But I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars and I bought the second book because I was like, okay, I'm invested. I need to know what happens with these spaceship flying, horse fox hunting characters who are like, it's so interesting. Anyways, so I read this kind of on a whim and I'm really glad that I did. I'll be definitely keeping this book, and my book 2 just got here today, so I'm actually really excited to continue the series, and yay for reading more sci-fi, because that was one of my big goals this year. Alright guys, the final book that I read in May was a spontaneous buddy read with my good friend Casey from Bookishly Bookish, who just dropped her first video back to BookTube after 2 years, and it is a beautiful, honest little ramble about her last 2 years and how affected she was by some personal loss in her life, and also how she has slowly regained her love of reading over the past year. And it's really beautiful, and I would highly recommend that you go watch it. I'm gonna link it up here. But anyways, Casey and I decided to spontaneously buddy read If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. This is a short translated contemporary Japanese novel, and like a lot of its fellows, this novel has a very straightforward and simplistic writing style that delves very deeply into human themes, everyday human themes. And in this book particularly, we follow a fairly young man who's about 30 who has just received the news that he has a terminal illness. A devil shows up shortly after that and offers him the chance to remove certain things from the world in order to extend his own life. And through that plot, we get a process of discovering what truly matters in life and how much our lives are worth, and how, you know, the difference between selfishness and selflessness. And like a lot of other Japanese modern novels that I have read or been aware of, it tackles those themes unapologetically, which I really love about this particular style of novel. However, this one specifically fell a little flat for me, and there are a few reasons for that. One, I feel like it went in so many different directions despite how short it is, that it never really committed to any of them in the sort of depth that I was looking for. And the other issue that I had with it is, despite the title and the suggestion that it is primarily featuring a cat, there was a distinct lack of cat in this novel. Don't get me wrong, there's a cat character in here, but it was kind of weird and background, where we just have a few mentions of it up until the latter part of the book, and even then it was kind of, I don't know, I found it kind of weird. What I was promised in this novel versus what I actually read, I felt like were kind of two different books, and it was fine. You know, there were some moments that really were hard-hitting, as I expected, but overall I never really hit to the level that I wanted it to, and it wasn't quite as impactful as I was hoping. But this is another one off of my translated fiction list, which I'm very excited about because I've also wanted to read a bunch of them this year. I've read enough of these now, though, that I am starting to fall in love with this particular style of storytelling and that kind of simplistic slice of life view of these deeper themes, which are often very similar to the themes that we're exploring in some of the epic fantasy that I read, which is very cool to see it done in two such different styles. So anyways, that was my final read of May. So that completes my wrap up for May. I didn't have any 5-star reads this month, which was a little sad, but I do have high hopes for June because some of the books that I'm going to be reading next month I think are going to be really heavy hitters, which excites me a lot. And I appreciated the variety in my May reads a lot. I never felt bored by anything I was reading, and it was fun to jump around in the genres a little bit. And I discovered a new author in Elizabeth Moon that I am really intrigued by and excited to read more of her work. I'm excited to continue with Sun Eater. So overall, a very successful month of reading. And I would love to know down in the comments below what you read in May and what your favorite book in May was. Let me know what you're excited about for June. And if you want to know what I'll be reading in June, go check out my TBR game video that I put together last week. It was a bunch of fun and I'm having a blast incorporating that into my monthly guidelines for reading. So anyways, I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope you are reading some 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.